Spirit Airlines, America's largest ultra-low-cost carrier, is rapidly phasing out its aging fleet of Airbus A319s. As any aviation enthusiast would, I wanted to get at least one flight on the Spirit A319 before they were all gone. So, on my way back to Chicago from Dallas, I took quite the detour to not only get a flight on the United 767, but also the Spirit A319, which we're flying today from Orlando to Atlanta. Unfortunately, things did not go entirely according to plan, but in addition to flying one of Spirit's oldest planes, you'll also get to see how they manage a delay. Good afternoon from Orlando, where I've just arrived on this United 767 from Houston. I had 7 hours before my next flight on Spirit Airlines, so I decided to relax and spend all of that time in the United Club thanks to my good friend that aviation geek who has a club membership and can bring along 2 free guests. Having not properly eaten since the very early morning, the free and decent food selection was much appreciated. The United Club also offers some solid views of the ramp, including of this elegant 757-200 pulling in from Newark. I was also able to spot our 767-300 depart right back for Houston a little over an hour after flying us in. Also, fun fact, that Delta 757-300 in the background is the exact same plane I flew from St. Louis to Atlanta in 2022. 7 hours in the United Club surprisingly went by quite fast. Most of that time was spent doing schoolwork and just enjoying the atmosphere since this was only my second time in a United Club. As expected, the club was quite packed during the afternoon with lots of flights leaving, but as the number of United departures began to slow down later in the day, it started emptying up. After parting ways with that aviation geek who was headed directly back to Chicago on United, I made my way to the airport train as United and Spirit now depart from different concourses, also known as airsides, here in Orlando. This is a slight change from the last time I was here in 2021 when both Spirit and United flights departed from airside 3, housing gates 30 through 59. Spirit has since moved to airside 1, housing gates 1 through 29. Now, if you haven't been to MCO Airport before, the 4 airsides comprising Terminals A and B are basically satellite buildings only accessible from the main central terminal area by train. As you can tell, getting from one airside to the other requires taking the train into the central area and then transferring onto another train. Now, do be aware that this process might not always be super smooth, as you might end up leaving the secure area and having to re-clear security just to get a train to another airside. It's sort of hard to fully explain and it can get really confusing. However, if you're transferring from airside 3 to airside 1, the trains to these areas depart from the same side, so you can easily get off one train from airside 3 and then walk to where the airside 1 trains depart from. This was kind of a relief since the last time I tried transferring airsides at this airport in 2018, I ended up having to re-clear security. The 4 main airsides across Terminals A and B aren't very different in terms of how they look or what amenities they offer. It's helpful to know that all of the main food and retail options are in the main atrium of each airside, otherwise there's not much down by the gate areas aside from some restrooms. Spirit is an ultra-low-cost airline, and so aside from one free personal item, they will charge extra for every carry-on or checked bag. Thankfully, I had paid for a carry-on while booking my flights, and if you're absolutely sure you're bringing a carry-on or checked bag, it's always the cheapest to buy them during online booking. Airside 1 is overrun by Spirit and Frontier flights, and it was crazy to see just how many destinations from all corners of the country and Latin America are served from Orlando by these 2 airlines. I gave myself a lot of extra time for getting to my gate, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, so I was able to get some dinner and sit in the atrium. Eventually, I noticed that our inbound aircraft still had not departed its origin, and so I made my way down to the gate to see if there were any updates. Sure enough, aside from the stereotypical Spirit passengers arguing about paying for bags, there were no updates on our flight. I then checked my flight status only to realize it was now showing up with a nearly 2-hour delay, and it wasn't hard to see why. Our plane was coming in from St. Louis over 2 hours late, though we never found out why it was so delayed departing from St. Louis. Alright everybody, so here's an update on what's going on real time. Hopefully you can hear me okay. It's pretty chaotic in the terminal right now. Here's our inbound aircraft, November 525, November Kilo. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that Flight Radar 24 actually spells out the registration for you. I just literally found that out. This plane flew to St. Louis and it landed in St. Louis on time. For whatever reason, it's departing St. Louis 2 hours late. There's no bad weather in St. Louis right now. I don't know what the reason is. Nobody's really told us anything. So with that 2-hour delay, it's coming here into Orlando about 2 hours late as well. As you can see, it's just fresh out of St. Louis, passing by Carbondale, Illinois, just southern Illinois there. It's coming into Kentucky, looks like now. So with that 2-hour delay, we're looking at a 12:23 a.m. departure, which is right about when we should have been in Atlanta, because our original departure was 10:37. So that's what it's looking like right now. I'm not too worried. I'm just confused on what to do for all this time, because I have like I originally almost had a 6-hour layover in ATL because my onward flight to Chicago departs at like 6 a.m. So if this holds up and we get into Atlanta around 1:30, 2 a.m., I'm not too worried because I'll still have 4 hours in Atlanta to chillax. Just hoping it doesn't get any worse as far as when the aircraft actually lands in Orlando. Hopefully we can get on board as quickly as possible and get out of here. But until then, just chilling out in the terminal. I'm gonna probably do some more homework, and then yeah, we're gonna see what happens next. So I sat back in the atrium and did some more work until I saw our plane was finally on descent into Orlando. On the way back to the gate, I spotted one of the older livery Spirit A320s, of which there are only a handful remaining. Our gate changed from gate 7 to gate 5, and now all that was left was to wait until our plane finally pulled in. Boarding on Spirit is divided into 2 zones. Anyone who purchases a carry-on bag in advance is assigned Group 1, so we would be among the first people on board. Boarding commenced at 12:05 a.m., 2 hours and 13 minutes late. It's about time, bro. Spirit's Airbus A319 comes in an all-economy layout with 145 seats. However, the first 2.5 rows have the big front seats, which are the Spirit version of a budget first class. The Airbus A319 has been in Spirit's fleet since 2005, and at its peak, the airline operated 35 of the type. At the moment, only 10 A319s remain in the fleet, and they're expected to be fully retired by 2025. Seat selection on Spirit always costs extra unless you purchase a bundle. During booking, I bought one of the bundles including a carry-on, seat selection, and priority boarding, so tonight I'm seated in 15A, which I had pre-booked for free. The seats are the typical budget airline style. There's very little padding and a basic seat back with this tiny table and seat pocket. The legroom is said to be 28 inches, but at 5'11", I was never really bothered by the seat and leg space, but that's just me. And contrary to popular myth, the air vents, reading lights, etc. are free on Spirit and you do not have to pay for them. Now, the aircraft was remarkably clean for the most part, which I was glad to see. However, the life jacket under my seat had somehow fallen out and was just sitting on the floor. Now, here's a massive throwback. If you notice on the bulkhead wall, this aircraft still carries the old Spirit grayscale branding that has been obsolete for several years now. I really do miss seeing this livery, which could be found on the A319s and also the OG A321s that have long been retired. Leave me a comment below if you remember these. Now, I thought that surely with this hefty delay, we would get everyone boarded and on our way promptly. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, as apparently one passenger never showed up, and so a lot of extra time was spent locating their bag and getting it off the plane before we finally departed. At this point, I couldn't tell you how long I had gone without proper sleep, and so I did the best I could to manage some proper shut-eye. I was just thankful that my original 6-hour layover in Atlanta would now be a bit shorter.
Place the elastic band around your head and tighten by pulling on the ends. Secure your own mask before helping others. Oxygen
Orlando to Atlanta is a relatively short flight. Everyone was sleeping, including myself, so there wasn't much to cover during this red-eye flight. Of course, the world's busiest airport isn't very busy at 2 a.m., so we didn't have to line up behind any arriving traffic. We had a rather short approach into ATL, landing on runway 9 right. Now, like I said, I was sleeping basically the whole time, so much so that for the first time in one of my trip reports, I missed covering the whole landing while sitting at the window seat. My one-way ticket from Orlando to Chicago via Atlanta was just shy of $125. Now, the flights themselves were about $55, but because I purchased a bundle that includes a carry-on, seat selection, and priority boarding, that brought the price up. Still, I thought this was great value, and even with all the extras, Spirit was the cheapest option by a significant margin. Now, I didn't take this flight with the pure intention of solely reviewing Spirit Airlines. As I said earlier, I only took it so I could fly Spirit's A319 before they were all gone, and I'm glad I did, despite the unpleasant delay. While the gate agents in Orlando didn't update us very much about the delay, the onboard crew were very helpful, and at the end of the day, Spirit came through and gave all of us $50 vouchers for future flights. Whether I use this or not, we will have to see. Initially, I was booked for about 6 hours here in Atlanta. Because we arrived 2 hours late, I now had 4 hours to endure before my onward flight to Chicago. Stay tuned for that video coming out very soon, but until then, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Take care, and I will see you all again very soon.